The latest philosophical ramble from Coming Up Next is coming your way in just a moment, my friends. But before we get there, are you subscribed to the show? It's very simple to do, and it's going to streamline your podcast listening experience. All you have to do is head to comingupnext.com.au, where you can find links to all the platforms that you might listen to podcasts on. Hit that link, hit subscribe, and then the show's going to download onto your device like clockwork each and every week. Hello and welcome, my friends, to another episode of Coming Up Next. If this is your first time tuning in, please make yourself at home, and if you already make yourself feel at home, welcome back. I'm Alistair Marks. This is the podcast ramble, the philosophical ramble, with some of the world's top creatives about how they've created a life of their own design. And before we get into this week's episode, thanks to my guest from last week, Amanda Logan. Amanda is the woman behind My Goodness Kitchen, which is a vegan blog that started out, in a very small capacity and has grown quite significantly. And she's just released her first cookbook last year, her first vegan cookbook. If you haven't checked it out, that episode, along with the entire back catalogue of podcast rambles, is available for your consumption at comingupnext.com.au. An absolute joy to introduce my guest this week, Rena Owen. You may know her from Once Were Warriors. She was in Star Wars Episode 2 and 3. She was in AI. She is currently in the show Siren. And she joined me from across the pond. And this is a particularly spiritual episode. We haven't had one of these, I don't feel, for some time, but Rena and I guess we just kind of started on this topic, and well, as you'll see, we didn't really get off it. We kind of circle around career, but it's really speaking in much more, I guess, philosophical terms about what it means to be an actor, to have a career as an artist. You know what, let's just get into it. Please enjoy and make welcome my guest this week, Rena Owen. I know that you obviously grew up in New Zealand, and I saw that you performed a lot in local cultural groups and when you were in high school. So I wonder if you recall when the first time that you did perform was.
I think you've got to go back even before then, and this is just a belief I have, is everybody is born to be good at something. And I have no doubts I was born to be creative. I was born hypersensitive. I was very, very sensitive. I had a very vivid imagination. I was highly creative, and I loved to play. And I think my first memory of actually performing was probably when I had just started Little People's School, primary school. So I was 5 years old, and we were learning traditional Maori singing and dancing in front of the primary school. We were being taught by Mrs. Few. So I have vivid memories of learning how to swing poise and swing my hips. And because I did grow up in the Bay of Islands, which is somewhat of a tourist resort, we would regularly entertain tourists and other shows and community groups, because these things were very vibrant when I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and we had athletics every Wednesday night. We had a lot of community stuff that doesn't really go on now, unfortunately. And because I grew up in rural New Zealand, Bay of Islands, which is in the north of the North Island, and because we grew up without technology, literally my grandmother had a dairy farm, and we kind of lived in the township which kind of built up around the freezing works. So I remember when my grandmother first got a TV. So as children, the wonderful thing about zero technology is we were very creative. We had to create our own fun, which we did. And because it was rural New Zealand, we were, excuse me, always out playing and building huts and playing cowboys and Indians and bull rush. And in summer we were always down at the rivers we'd be out at the beach. So our whole childhood was creative. We also had jungle gyms at school, and we had gymnastics, and sports in New Zealand was a part of everyone's life. So I did track and field. I did everything. So hugely creative. It's very different now. A lot of children don't even know how to talk to each other. They're just constantly got their face in technology. So I always was in the Māori culture group, and I was first published when I was 8 years old. I wrote a poem. There was a children's contest for poetry for under 10-year-olds, and I won, and it was a poem about rain. And I won a whole $5, which was a lot of money.
Wow.
for a girl in the 60s, and my poem got printed. And so I always remained in the Kapahaka group, the Māori Culture Club, and just naturally when I went on to Bay of Islands College, which is in Kawakawa, stayed in the Māori Culture Club, and once again we entertained other schools. We went touring around the country. We entertained at Waitangi Day, the big tourist days in the Bay of Islands. And one particular performance, and I would have been about 15 going on 16, and our principal, we had an amazing principal, Mr. Ledley. He came and watched us perform, and we did a girls' haka, and I led this haka, and he was very impressed with my performance. And he said to Mr. Gaze, who was the head of the English department, he said, "Oh, I think you better audition that young Owen girl. She's got something." So those were his exact words. So I got to audition for Bloody Mary and the musical South Pacific, and I got the role. So that was my first big kind of stage production, and I was 16, and I never forgot the buzz I got off making people laugh. And I also never forgot the buzz I got from making my mum and dad proud. And the following year, I got promoted straight to the lead role of Calamity Jane in Calamity Jane, and I also did a couple of community plays. One was for the Catholic Church. We were raised Catholics. But at the end of the 70s, it wasn't a career option to me. I mean, being an actor or writer was not considered a real job. As a woman, my career options were I could be a secretary, a teacher, a nurse. And thirdly, as a biracial girl, I had no role models. We didn't have brown faces on our TVs or movies. So I went off and trained as a nurse. I moved to Auckland and went through extreme culture shock. And spent 3.5 years nursing, and I qualified as a general and obstetric nurse, and then I went to London. And that's a whole different story unto itself. So I'll stop now in case you want to just review anything from first.
You covered a lot of ground there.
Yeah.
I suppose the kind of thing that really sticks out to me is this idea that you knew, or that you always felt, I guess, intuitively, like you were destined to do something creative or have a creative professional life.
Absolutely. I knew I was not cut out to sit behind a desk or do a 9 to 5. And I knew as a teenager, when I did my first musical production, I thought, this is it. I found my place in the world, and I loved it, and I really thrived off it. In fact, as I wasn't doing well at high school, I was getting into trouble, and I was just a bit wayward. And then, that musical came along, and it kind of changed my life, because I found a place where I felt I belonged. And the following year, the principal gave me a book for my cultural contribution to the life of the school. So really, he was a big major part of going, I know what this girl needs, and, she's got this talent, that talent, and boom, he put me on that stage. And yeah, I knew, but unfortunately, society wasn't aligned for me to kind of go on and make it a career of it. So I had to go through a whole lot of other life experiences before I got back to that path.
Yeah.
But I think most people know, intuitively know, or just they know what they like. They know what they're drawn to. They know what they're attracted to. They know what you want to wake up for. I mean, I knew the subject I was bored with, and I just want to go to sleep. So I think that's just part of growing up. You have a sense. I believe everyone has a sense of what they like and what they don't like.
I remember at school I definitely felt most at home in the drama class or on stage as well. That was definitely, those were the classes that I always prioritized over anything else, and those were the experiences that I kind of yearned for or thrived in.
Yeah, same. I remember actually one of my first reviews was for Bloody Mary. They go, it was very funny actually. It just said, not too sure about her singing voice, but she's a good little actress. And I was. It was kind of just, writing, acting. They've been intuitive gifts. These are. I really do believe that God creates every single one of us to be good at something, and you can't be something you're not. If you just can't. You can spend your life trying to be, but it will never ever quite gel or click because it's not what you're born to do. So absolutely, being a creative is what I was created to do.
Do you feel as though your religious upbringing helped you with that kind of certainty or that intuitive belief?
No, not necessarily, but what it did, what I'm grateful for it, because that was kind of more about doctrine and dogma and ritual. But the thing I'm grateful for is that it gave me a concept of God, of a God. It gave me a concept of there was something greater than me, and I always had a heart for God. I always believed in God. I don't necessarily practice religion, and I'm not into dogma or doctrine. So, no, if anything, I think I had to work out a whole lot of, a lot of Catholicism. Catholicism came with a lot of guilt and a lot of stuff you kind of have to grow out of or sort it out, So, I think it's wrong to kind of put that under religion, because I do believe God helped me to find my way, but that doesn't come under religion for me.
Okay.
It comes under relationship.
Right.
I have a relationship with a God of my understanding. Am I still a Catholic? Yeah. Am I a practicing Catholic? No. But I'm still a Catholic. I was baptized a Catholic. And, if I was to kind of look at religion at all in that kind of context, then I look at the man, I look at the human being that Jesus was. Unfortunately, I think religion's given Jesus a bad name because everyone sees the negative of Christianity versus what he was in terms of being the epitome of humanity, being human and coming to remind people about the law of love rather than the love of law. And also, I mean, I've often found myself saying that to gay friends of mine, he wouldn't be sitting there judging you. He'd be sitting in the gutter with a gay guy who's got AIDS. But we've all lost sight of that. We've all lost sight of the purpose of I guess, of Christ. It's all been warped. Like every religion gets warped and used for it gets twisted by man, but that's a whole another big conversation, and I'm not an expert in that conversation, so I shouldn't have even started down that track. It's a personal, private thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And that's what I respect with other people. It's not my business.
Sure.
If they believe in a God, if they don't believe in a God, it's not my business. It's a personal, faith is a personal, private thing. And I've always had faith, and I definitely believe in God. And I don't believe I would be here if I hadn't have believed in God. I think I'll say one more thing about it, because as I say, if you want to cover career, then we just, they're very big topics.
Mm.
But, even as a writer, I am merely, as an actor, the way I approach writing and the way I approach acting, it's a spiritual intervention. I become a vessel. Yeah, I do my homework. I learn my lines. But when I write, I know when I'm being inspired. I know when I'm being led. And when I act, when I open myself up and I just ask God to flow through me, it's a divine act for me. It's a spiritual act. Everything I do creatively is first and foremost a spiritual act. Yeah, I can take credit for getting my butt out of bed and doing the work and showing up. But then I let go and I let God. And that's magic, and that's spontaneity, and the best creativity comes out of that combustion.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I feel a similar way in my experience of creative expression, I suppose, particularly when you feel very connected to whatever it is and however it is that you're creating. There is this feeling of I get a very strong sense of connection to something otherworldly, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Well, it kind of, for me, you have to get out of your mind. And whenever you're put in a situation where you have to get out of your mind, that's a good place to be. Because being in your mind isn't always a good place to be. That's the battlefield, and that's where ego is going to hit up against intellect and analytics and all of that. And I mean, for me, spirituality, I've got to go into my heart. And for me, the seat of God is in my heart. And for me, church is in my heart. That's my first and most primary church, is in my heart, and that's where relationship happens. And it's a process of love. I believe that God is love and love is God.
Mm.
And that we're on this journey as species learning how to love ourselves just the way God loves us. And I think that's the problem with a lot of religion, is it would lead you to believe that you're not good enough, or that you're guilty, or that you're too much of a sinner, or it's all that block. It's all that block. It's all that mental stuff that, which is that kind of a lie. Because God loves us just the way we are. And that was a big freedom for me when I realized God loved me just as my flawed self, that I didn't have to be perfect to come before God. In fact, it's quite the opposite. God loves brokenness. You know why? Because when we're broken, we're vulnerable and we're open. That's a good thing about rock bottoms. When you hit a rock bottom, there's only one way you can look, and that's up. And you look at us as creatures, the way we've been designed as babies. We come into this world and we're totally helpless. We're totally dependent. And if we are blessed with growing old, old age, we return to that state of total dependence and total helplessness, so that we almost become childlike before we can cross over.
Mm.
You look at another way I look at it, because when I teach drama, I teach actors, I talk about this, that it's all in breathing. It's all about being in your breath, being in your heart. It's physically we're attached to this umbilical cord. And so when we're in that state in the womb as a fetus, it's not something we've had to learn. We're just born that way. And we come out into this world. And the first thing we do is we take a breath, and we're alive. And the last thing we do is we exhale. And that's the thing that connects every single living organism in this world that we live in, is breath. We are, the Western world somewhat can teach people that we're our minds or we're our bodies. But you can live without a mind. Just look at a brain dead person. You can live without a body. Look at a paraplegic. But the one thing that we cannot live without, the one thing that defines us, the one thing that gives us the breath of life is the breath. And that's creation. And for me, I believe we breathe in our spirit when we come to life, and our spirit leaves our body when we pass. And without breath, which is something we don't even, it's just innate. It's just like how innately we will grow teeth. Innately we will learn to walk. Unless, of course, you've got a congenital illness or something like that. And so I always think, as an artist, as a creative, I'm always going back to the basics of what makes us human in order to get to humanity, because that's all I am. I'm a storyteller of humanity. I'm a portrayer of humanity. I portray human behavior. So it's a big part of my job to try and understand what makes us click. And I guess that's where nursing was a really great career, because I was one of the last classes to be hospital trained. So we'd have 3 weeks on a ward and then 1 week in university or nurses school. So I got up close and personal with watching stuff like brain surgery. I got up close and personal like watching babies being born. I got to see some of the most dramatic stuff working in accident and emergency. I got to see just things I will never forget, and learn things that have proved to be like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is our number one basic need, is, of course, air, water, food, love, things like that. So that proved to be a really good foundation for what I then went on to do, which was come back to what I believe was my true calling, which was to be a creative, was to be a storyteller.
I wonder how you did reconcile, I suppose, the notion that you may not have been able to follow that path, given that, like you were saying earlier, there wasn't any real diversity on screens, particularly, I would imagine, in somewhere like rural New Zealand. How did you kind of reconcile this idea that you may not have a career in a creative field, or was that why you moved overseas?
No, and I didn't even have to do a reconciliation about that, because that's the gift of youth. When you're young, or you don't know anything like that.
Yeah.
You don't learn these things till you get old, Alistair. You look back and go, "Oh, damn! I could have done that, or I could have done this, or I should have done that." This is the gift of youth. I went to London with £2 in my pocket, and one phone number. Not once did I think, what am I going to do if my friend does not answer this phone number? And this was in a time when there were no cell phones. This was in 1982. This is the gift of youth. You live totally and selfishly. You are consumed with the moment. You have no concept of the future, and you have little perception of the past. You have everything. You're invincible. It is the gift of youth. And then you fall over, you get knocked down, or you get bruised, or you get battered. And that's life. And that fearlessness and recklessness that comes with youth. Because once you get burned, you once bitten, twice shy. So it's not at all like I went through a period of like, oh, damn, I could have been this, that. It didn't even occur to me back then because I didn't know any better, Alistair. There was one thing that my mother looked up in a newspaper because it was an advertisement looking for young Maori girls for a show that was going to tour internationally. And she rang it up, and, to perform on boats and in clubs and things, she rang this organization up, but it was kind of to be topless. And she's like, nope, you're not doing that. It wasn't that my parents were against it. It wasn't a career in New Zealand. I doubt that it was very much of a career in Australia in the late 70s. And you got to remember too, the majority of women at that point were still being housewives or secretaries, teachers, or nurses. So it wasn't just a diversity of being biracial or color. It was also what was happening in terms of where we were at in our society. So you don't really know that you've been denied of something if you never had it in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
It was never an option to me. So, no, I was too busy having fun, Alistair. I was too busy being young and discovering everything. And, I moved from the country bumpkin, and I moved to the city as 18, and that in itself was an enormous adventure. And going through culture shock. I mean, I came out of a town that was 98% Māori, that was 98% Native. And I went into a class of 66 girls, and I was the only Māori girl. So that was an enormous culture shock. And I look back at how I adapted, really, because it was an extreme culture shock. And I cried, and I'd ring my mother every night, and I just want to come home, And they wouldn't let me go home, so that was good, because I hung in there. But, I took to the fashion at the time, which was at the end of the punk rock era, going into ska and all of that. And really, I look back on that, and I affiliated with the outsiders because I felt like an outsider. And I think most creatives feel like outsiders because we're different. That was another thing that I experienced throughout childhood, that I think is very common amongst creatives because we're hypersensitive. And other children perceive us to be different or perceive us to be something that is threatening to them. But we often are the ones who get bullied. And, oh, yeah, I got bullied and picked on throughout my childhood. So that's a common thing that happens with creatives because there's something about us. I can't articulate it because I would often think, why me? Why are they always beating up on me or picking on me? I guess I was vulnerable, you know? I was vulnerable and I would never fight back because I didn't want to hurt anybody.
Well, there's that empathy and that sensitivity.
Absolutely. And that I was an empath. And, it was hard growing up like that, being hypersensitive, because I could feel everything and see everything. And people often, I think, will find creatives very odd or unusual. Or often, I think there's one too many I should be careful what I say, but there are a lot of spectrums out there in this day and age. I think I would have fitted on multiple spectrums. So, you're lucky as a creator if you can get to that place in your life where you've hung in there and your uniqueness and your oddness or your eccentricities have become your best friends. But growing up, it was very difficult because children need to fit in, children need to belong, and children need to be liked.
I think the notion that the hanging in there is a very apt sort of point. And I was reading in an interview that you gave a few years ago, where you said something to the effect of, it's a hard slog and there's a lot of sacrifice involved with being an actor, and that you almost left it all behind in 2014.
Every decade.
I'm quite taken by that as that notion, considering the success that you have had, with Once Were Warriors, with Star Wars, with AI, and now with shows like Sirens.
Persevere. It's happened every time. I kid you not. This has happened on a regular basis, pretty much every decade. And I think that word perseverance is not appropriate just to our industry. It's appropriate to any industry. It's the ones who persevere. It's the ones who never give up. If you hang in there long enough, it does come back to you. And I remember the first decade, I did Once Were Warriors. I was doing a lot of theatre and bits of television work. And I remember complaining and moaning to my mother that I felt like I was working my butt off because I was also having to do jobs. To pay rent. So I was just like running and hustling that whole first 8 years. And I remember going, I'm going to give it up because I've got nothing to show for it. I'm just tired and I'm working my butt off. And, I was kind of losing hope. And she just said, just hang in there, girl, just hang in there. And, if I hadn't hung in there for one more year, I would never have gotten Beth in Once Were Warriors. And I remember when I got that role, I felt, wow, I felt like I had earned that role. Not only did I feel like I had earned that role, I was ready for it. And then, I went on to do other stuff, other TV series, more films, indies, as you say, studio. I guess on that topic, us Kiwis, we, as Sam Neill said, we invented the word modesty, so we don't really brag, we don't show off, we don't really talk about ourselves, which doesn't help in a country like America. But I am actually the only actress in the world to have worked with both George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. There's only been 6 actors, and I'm the only female, so that's pretty awesome.
That's a pretty amazing thing to say.
Go 10 years forward, I would have gone through the same process. Because and then 10 years later, the same process. And then the similar process with what happens with Siren. Because you get to that point. Here's the thing about this game, which is why I never recommend it. I say to youth, 2 things. People have got to eat. Food industry. And secondly, people get sick. Medicine. If you get a career in food or medicine, you'll always have a regular job because people have to eat and people get sick. The arts will always be considered a luxury. I personally don't see them as a luxury. I see them as a necessity, and I do see that writers are recorders of history, as are filmmakers. and we're all commenting on aspects of our race and our evolution and history and culture. But I remember with sorry, because you just get to that point where you don't know where your next paycheck. So this is where faith, going back to our early conversation, where faith played an enormous part. Because if I didn't have faith, I wouldn't have lasted 10 years in this career. But I had faith, and I lived on faith, and I knew that God would always provide. And I would get taken right down to the wire, like $0, and then boom, I'd get a job. And every time, and I do believe in the saying, faith is always rewarded. Because we're having the spiritual, emotional dependence upon who we believe to be our creator, that our creator will take care of us. And when you do believe that, it does become a truth. Well, it's been a truth for me. And I remember before Sirens, well, actually a few years before then, it was getting, well, accumulation really. I was in my 50s, and I was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. I'm just too old to keep living like a student and juggling credit cards and going in, working, putting lots of work into auditions and going in and doing it and busting butt and then getting rejected and having nothing to show for it. And I remember before Sirens, I had this real heart-to-heart talk with my creator, and I just said, you know what, if the acting dream is done, if it's over, it's okay. It's okay. I'm okay with that. I've had an interesting life. I've had a great career. It's okay for me to move on. But you got to tell me what you want. And the question came back to me loud and clear, and it was, what do you want? And I had to explore, and it was a very intimate process, and it had to be honest, and it was vulnerable, because I really had to explore my heart and identify in my heart what it was that I really wanted. And in the bottom of my heart was still this little candle burning to work as an actor in America. And I remember feeling it and seeing it, and I remember crying. Because it is often hard for us to ask for what we want because we're afraid we won't get it. But I owned it. I said, yes, okay. I still have a desire in my heart to work as an actor in America, but I would just really like to get a role that I'm right for just the way I am. I'd also like it to be a role that would come with income so I can pay off debt and support myself. And I kid you not, within that week I had multiple auditions. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm still in the game. By the end of that second week, I'd booked Siren. Not more than 2 to 3 weeks had gone by before I booked Siren, and I got exactly what I asked for, a role that I was perfect for just the way I was, a unique and original role, and it came with a regular paycheck. So, these things, I am a testimony. My life is a testimony. I mean, there's many, many more stories that I can't go into right now, but where there's just gone, there's no explanation for that except the grace and mercy of a God who loves me unconditionally. And that's the thing that's worked for me and helped to set me free, is that I do believe in a God that loves me unconditionally. It's not conditional. And that's where religion has let down a lot of people, or where they've used it to control, like, oh, well, God won't love you if you do this or you do that. God loves us just the way we are. And God really only asks for one thing in return, that we love the God of our understanding. And I always like to, credit where credit is due. But yeah, I wouldn't still be in this industry if I did not have faith and if I wasn't a believer in a power that was the ultimate creator. I mean, I've developed this project, as I'm sure you've read about, this big epic project based on the first historical novel to be written by a Māori, called Behind the Tattooed Face. And the whole way that was written was, I won't take credit for it. There is a character in the script that did not come out of the book. All I did, I'll take credit for listening and following. And that's what intuition is for me as well, creative intuition. Like, I've always been intuitively intelligent, and I just thought that that's the way everybody was when I was growing up. But it wasn't until I was Well, I did pass school C and UE without studying a lot, because when I saw things, I thought that they were basic, black and, simple, 1 + 2 = 3. But it really wasn't until I started working in theatre and I thought people saw scripts the way I saw it, and that I realised, no, it's not. I would always see things with those intuitive eyes, or I would feel it. It's like when I'm working as an actor, I never watch. And people have often asked me why I don't watch, and I go, because that's not my job. What it looks like is the director and the cinematographer and makeup and wardrobe. That's their job. What it looks like is their job. My job as an actor is what it feels like. So if I start to suddenly go and look at the monitor, then guess what? I'm going to go into my head. I'm going to go into my mind, and I'm going to start judging and criticizing. And that's never good for creativity. I've got to stay in the source. I've got to stay in my intuition, which is in my belly and in my heart, and just trust. I am a very intuitive creative, so I trust that. And and that's part of what I believe is my gifting, or my talent from my creator.
Yeah, I think that's a very pertinent point you make. Understanding and kind of knowing, particularly in collaborative creative industries, what your job is and what your task is, and placing your trust in other people's expertise and profession. And like you say, you don't want to get you don't want to become too analytical when you're doing something creative.
No, we're our own worst critics. We're not subjective. We're not objective. We're subjective.
I wonder if you have noticed any sort of consistent traits through all of these amazing people that you've worked with over the years. If there were any consistent traits that they've had that you think have set them up for careers with longevity.
They've all stayed very close and very connected to their inner child, the source of their creativity. They're all big kids in their playpens. And the only thing that really differs is the budget. So with George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, they've got really big playpens, huge playpens. But, they're the same breed. The only difference is George is a lot more introverted and shy, and Spielberg's very extroverted and very sociable. But all of these I found with Seth MacFarlane is another creative I've worked with recently, who very much works in that zone, and it's just like he's a kid at a party. And I do believe that our inner child is the source of our creativity, and that's that part of that fabric of God is in our inner child. And you can always see that with people who are very connected to their inner child, because even though our bodies might get older, we always have this kind of youth and this youth and this energy of enthusiasm and passion, because we love what we're doing. So that's another big element of it, is being connected to your inner child and remaining childlike, and remaining passionate and enthusiastic and loving what you do. Because if you love what you do, then your energy for it is endless, and your enthusiasm for it is endless. So that was always something every creative, amazing creative I've worked with, is they've all had that childlike quality, and the sensitivity. I don't think you can be a creative without having that sensitivity, or that empathy, that insight, perseverance, the belief in something bigger than themselves, whether that's a vision or a God, whatever you want to call it. It's just, I do believe, though, I do believe that I used to struggle with coming to terms with, like, well, okay, on one hand, it's destiny, and then on the other hand, life is what you make of it. So I think I found that a healthy balance by going, okay, God creates opportunities, but what we do with those opportunities is our personal responsibility.
Yeah, and I think that's a really that's an empowering way to kind of frame it as well.
It is, because you know what? The onus is on you to show up.
Yeah.
God can't use us if we don't show up. God can't use us if we're not available. You know, creativity can't flow for us if we're zoning out or we're being couch potatoes. You know, we've got to, we help to create our opportunities. And I think by showing up and persevering, we're proving ourselves to a certain degree where the process trusts us, go, well, they showed up for this, they'll show up for that. You know, it's like that saying, to whom much has been given, much is expected. We are all servants, I believe, at the end of the day, and particularly more so when we've chosen creative careers. And this is what I think this is a really important thing that the successful people I've worked with all know and believe. We're servants. We're just vehicles. We're just instruments. And we're there to serve our audiences. It's a servantile job. We're there to entertain people, to educate people. So the people who I've found to be mega, uber talented, whatever you want to say, uber successful, they've all come out of this place of humility. And that humility is attached and associated with their humanity.
Yeah, and I think that's always going to be a great marker of success, is what the depth of your kind of humility, and I'm getting into a bit of a kind of earnest space here, but I think that's a really great sort of thing to reiterate.
Yeah, and to aspire for.
Yeah.
You know, when you realize that you're working for a greater good, it always helps. Because we all suffer humanness. We're all going to sometimes get selfish or self-centered. But then when you go and look at it and go, you know, how can I be of service here? Or who am I actually helping here? And that attention goes on to something greater than yourself. It really does work. And I think that's us. We're dependent upon it as a race in order to survive. We're dependent upon the goodness of our neighbors, of strangers. We're dependent upon the goodness of our species. And I will always like to believe that goodness will always win out. Because I do believe that we fundamentally come out of an act of love, out of the ultimate act of creation. I mean, you know, you look at our species. Whoever created our species is pretty damn intelligent. I mean, just look at our bodies and how our heart and our brains and things work. I mean, it's just an intelligence that is like, who created this? I don't know. Maybe we'll all find out when we cross over, eh? Who knows?
Yeah.
You know, this is what I'm kind of saying. You know, I think for me, it is important for me to feel I have a relationship with God that, yeah, and I need someone like me. I do need to have that accountability because, you know, it's part of culture and part of creed that I can often be a little too proud, or you know, we'll get a little too arrogant or a little too whatever. You know, I have to keep an eye on myself because. So I think self-awareness is another really important quality. Keeping yourself in check. Staying humble, keeping it honest. I mean, for me to work as an actor and a writer, it has to come out of truth. You know, it's like I remember Lee Tamahori saying this about me in an interview. He said, you know, everything has to be real for Rena. It has to feel real. It has to be real. And Once We're Warriors was one of those films where I just intuitively knew that if anyone saw that we were acting, the movie wouldn't work.
Very true.
It's like now with Siren. I always knew this from day one. If Rin didn't work, if people did not believe her to be a mermaid or love on her and believe that the people around her were a real part of the fabric of this small town, the show would not work. So I think that that's a quality that all filmmakers and storytellers aspire. They aspire to bring a truth to the imaginary worlds they create. And I think, acting, you go through the complexities and the hardships of your 20s and your 30s while you're still trying to figure yourself out and find yourself, and, trying to be clever or trying to whatever, or fighting or rebelling or whatever you went through. But life has a way of stripping it all away. It just does. If you're fortunate enough to survive, life has a way of just stripping it all away to, help us evolve into this place that it comes with maturity. And in fact, we were talking about it today with a director, working with a wonderful director. And, she said to me, she said, "Oh, thank you so much for being a teamster, for being a player." And I just said, it's just all about keeping it simple. It's about keeping it simple and solutions. And that's the gift of maturity. Youth is wasted on the young. And I hate to say it because I'm showing my age now. It's true. Youth is wasted on the young. Now I'm like my aunties that went, "Oh, God, if I only knew what I know now at your age." But you know what? It doesn't get to go down like that because we evolve. It's called growing up. And, with maturity, you get to be more comfortable in your skin. You get to learn how to trust yourself more. And once you get to that place where you can trust yourself, you start trusting those around you. I used to be a terrible perfectionist, Alistair, in the first couple of decades of my career. I was a terrible perfectionist because I always aspired it to be perfect, and it would never, ever be good enough until you realize that aspiring to perfection is a futile process because really only God is perfect. But that the worst part of being a perfectionist is you persecute yourself and you persecute those around you. And you really do. But you can't get out of it until you become secure. And in order to become secure, you've got to learn to trust others and trust the process. And so now work is, and I remember Michael Caine. I was very lucky as a young actor in London. Michael Caine used to run master workshops, and he talked about that, because it is all a process of relaxation and letting go. But he said, in order for you to let go, you've got to be secure. In order to be secure, you've got to have done your homework. And when you look at all the masters of whether it's sports or just those that are really good at what they do, they make it look easy, Alistair. And it is easy because they've gotten to that place where it just does itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. There's that ease, that comfortability, and I think also the acknowledgement or the knowledge that the art is actually in the imperfection. It's not in the perfection, I guess, as you say.
Absolutely. No, it's not. No, that's a path to persecution. And no, I'm glad I got over that one. But as I say, a lot of these lessons, we all have to just, a lot of us, that's why they're called growing pains, because it hurts sometimes. But, there's kind of no shortcut to it.
Yeah.
And there's no shortcut through your teenage years, which I don't think I'd want to go through teenage years again. I mean, I distinctively remember the poignant moment where I lost my innocence and became aware when I saw myself in the mirror and I had a pimple on my chin. And suddenly in that moment, that innocence was gone. And it was painful because I saw this pimple. And I suddenly became self-conscious. It was horrible, actually, going through teen years. I don't think I'd want to do that again. And then there's no shortcuts through your 20s and your 30s. And so if you get to hang around, it does. It's almost like, for me, the most kind of more recent shift is the blessing that Siren has afforded me, is it feels like, I finally got over the hump and have been able to move out of the hustle mode and just go, I've got a regular job for a season of time, and just to relish it and to enjoy. And I love playing Helen. She's the best character, and I just have a blast with her. And I think that's a lot also to do with the fact that I'm at a place where I just dig on myself the way I am, and with all my oddity and cray, and that translates to the character, because that is the gift of your 50s. Actually, you walk into unlike your 20s or your 30s, you walk in through auditions and you don't care. You're psychologically saying, take it or leave it, like it or lump it. I don't really care anymore.
Yeah.
It does, because you've earned those stripes to a certain degree, and you're not of that age where you're looking to people please, or you're looking for people to whatever. You're just showing up and going, this is me. If I fit in your vision, boom. It's just, and that's exactly what happened with Siren. I'd gotten to that point in my life where it's just like, okay, I'm happy to throw the towel in and move on. But I got auditions. So I'm like, okay, I'm still still in the game, and just walked into the room, and this is me, and just did my bit and booked. So it's not even a conscious confidence. I don't know what the right word. It was an act of surrender. I do know that.
Yeah.
It was a real act of surrender and letting go, and just going, okay, I'm just going to totally trust where life takes me. So it just kind of flowed. And that's kind of a word I'm trying to, kind of just be more mindful of where I'm at right now, which is just allowing things to just flow.
I think there's something to kind of circle back as we kind of wrap up. I think there's something very graceful in allowing things to flow. And yeah, I mean, this has not been the sort of conversation that I thought we were going to have, but it's been an incredible chat. I'm really, really grateful for your insights. I finish all of my conversations with the same question, which I guess kind of links into the childlike trait that you mentioned before, that a lot of these people have maintained, and it's in the irreverence. I try to end the conversation on an upward note, and the question is, what makes you silly?
Oh, good. My laugh. I've got they actually wrote about it in my high school reference. She has a distinctive laugh. I do have a very distinctive laugh. So when I laugh, the whole room laughs. It's an infectious laugh. People love it when I laugh because they can't help but laughing with me, and it is a very silly laugh. And I'm just. Yeah, I like being silly. I like I like having fun, and it is something that's come with maturity, because I was full of so much angst in my earlier decades. My angst, you're just angst-ridden, and you're desperate to succeed and all those things, but you get to just kick back and be silly and have fun. The longer you stay in this industry, and I've been in it now over 30 years, so I consider myself very blessed, and you just get better at just being present and relishing the moment, and in those moments comes a lot of silliness, because you just don't take yourself too seriously anymore.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't. Whereas in your 20s and your 30s, my God, I took myself so seriously.
Yeah. My grandfather always used to say when we were growing up, thou shalt obey, particularly the 11th commandment, thou shalt laugh, especially at thyself.
Yeah. Absolutely. We should always laugh at ourselves. And I think for me, I'm also at that point where it's like, you've got to be quick to laugh at yourself and quick to forgive yourself. But, the ultimate medicine I have found, and as hippie as this sounds, it is true. It's self-love. You got to love on yourself, because nobody else will. Well, they may, but, self-love is the ultimate medicine. When you love on yourself, you forgive yourself. You just you take better care of yourself. You're honoring yourself, and in the process of doing that, you're honoring your maker, because you're at your best when you're loving on yourself. And it's hippie, but God, it remains to be true. Love, it's all about it, and it's what the world we sorely needs. We're seeing way too much hate and way too much war and all those things. And, just wherever you can shine love and light, I've always kind of aspired to do that as a creative. But, next time we'll have a good chat about my career.
Yeah. We'll do part 2.
Yeah,
pragmatic
we'll
version.
do part 2, but it's been great to talk with you, Alistair, and yeah, laugh, live. What were those 4 words back in the 80s? God, it was live, laugh, live.
Live, laugh, love.
Love, light. Yeah, there was those 4 hours. Live, laugh, light, love.
Yeah.
It's true. And they still remain true to this day. So God bless you, Alistair. And I look forward to part 2.
Thank you very much, Ren. I really appreciate your time.